Hi, welcome to this video, which I am going to treat as if it were alive. This is going to be an analysis that we are going to do. So the questions are, how? Like, as in, how do I know? So this video is about Polynesian or Melanesian ancestry among Puerto Ricans, which are the Boricua. But in general, this ancestry that I'm going to talk about, Melanesians or Polynesians, this ancestry is among most Native Americans, and I'm going to explain you why and how. So those are the two things that we are going to tackle, and I'm just going to try to make it quick. So let's tackle the why and the how. So how do I know, and why is it there? Because what I'm telling you, this is a genetic fact, and I'm going to tell you how I got there. But if you want to quickly know about the first Native Americans, well, in the genetic tests and in more advanced genetic results, more broader and detailed results of the full genome. So if we run it like that, then it classifies this DNA as Papuan. So there may be many reasons why this ancestry is classified as Papuan, but in general, it's most likely from many different migrations that come from Polynesia, Oceania, and Melanesia. And so a whole bunch of people from the Pacific went to certain places in the Americas. For instance, I can say that there is actually a genetic map that is recording a haplotype called C, and I believe it was from the Y chromosome, that went through the equator. I mean, not equator, Ecuador, or was it Peru? Or wait a minute, it was Peru. I believe they came in through the Pacific, and I'm talking about the map. I'm not talking about what I believe. I'm talking about this actual map, about genetics, about what archaeogenetics and what happened. So there is this map that goes from Peru to Colombia to Venezuela, and then it goes through the islands, like for instance Dominicas, and this ancestry continues, and it goes through the islands, for instance Curacao, and then it ends in Puerto Rico in an arc. But it doesn't go to Puerto Rico's neighbors who are haplotype Q when we're talking about the Y chromosome. So they didn't go to the Dominican Republic, and they didn't go to Cuba, because the predominant haplotypes of Cuba and the Dominican Republic, which is Quisqueya and Haiti. When we're talking about the natives, then that is definitely Q. It's also present in Puerto Rico, and I would say it's most likely that there's two male lineages in Puerto Rico, and the same thing cannot be said at the same level for the Dominican Republic and, for instance, the Cuban faction. And then This is also a genetic factor. We may also see this haplotype that is not only that wasn't only present among Puerto Ricans, but you may also see it abroad. Maybe the Cariba have some of this haplotype C. That I read it, by the way, in a genetic paper that the C was found in Puerto Rico, but it began in Peru, or it also there was maybe another route through the currents through Chile. But conclusive to this, the thing is that this was a migration. This was one of the migrations from the Papuans that I'm gonna tell you. Like for instance, if you run through my get match results, if you run through my get match results, then you may see that I am gonna have like 4% Papuan, and it's no joke. And I'm gonna tell you what type of conclusions did I get, you know, upon seeing my Papuan results. But what I was trying to say is that also that like there's also like 1% East Asian, that it always comes up as maybe like 1% East Asian, like solidly. So therefore, how can we explain that, right? Well, I can't. So you have to remember that sometimes you get your ethnicities from maybe a grandparent or something in that manner, but ethnicities carry certain certain people groups. For instance, if you're Polynesian, well, we know that these type of Polynesians have a mixture between. They have a mixture between East Asians and the Melanesians, which are the Negritos or your Australoids or something. No, not Australoid. They are the type that are Australian natives, which are more alike the Papuans. But this migration may account for maybe like 2% of my, in general, 4% Papuan. You know, my 4% Papuan, which is not gonna come out in ancestry DNA or in all these DNA tests. Why? Or in my heritage, it's not gonna necessarily come out, and it's not, because this is an ancient DNA. These alleles now belong to the native faction. They're so ancient that it's just DNA that is being carried through these particular Native American ethnicities or these Polynesians, that eventually you will see that I'm gonna have 1% from the Tibet, which I do, and 1% East Asia or something like that, which I do. And that's not the only East Asian classifications that the test found in my DNA. But this is pertaining the Melanesian, you know, the Oceanic, the Oceania people, that type of people. Well, about 2% of that and maybe 1% of the East Asian, you can presume is from one of these immigrations. And the one that I mentioned was the one that entered through Peru, and this was happening in all the way from maybe the 9th century to the 13th century. A whole bunch of people were traveling from East Asia, and they were going to many places. And what was happening? Well, if you want to go to history, well, first the genetics, right? So we know that a whole bunch of people are coming to the Americas, and they're actually mixing with the natives, with the natural natives that were unmixed, who are the Ana. And when all these people came in, they became the new Native Americans, if I may. You know, but you can expect that about 1% or 2% of this immigration was from the Melanesian, and then 1%, and then 1% from the East Asian, and some of that East Asian may also be from the Neo-Siberians. But nonetheless, these Melanesians and these Neo-Siberians were fleeing from North Eurasia, and some of them were even in Polynesia, yet they were still fleeing. So what was happening? So maybe, like, the thing that I'm trying to explain is that maybe the information was going faster than whatever however this empire may be spreading around the world, was one of the biggest empires in the world. It's called Genghis Khan. That's what was happening at that point in time, when all of these people are coming into the Americas, and that's when the Native Americans have their biggest change. So, and then I already confirmed that I have like 2%, or it's about 3 or 4 maximum of Melanesia, of these Papuan like ancestry. And how do I know that maybe Puerto Rico were very high in this ancestry? Because I'm a castizo. What does that mean? That I'm an individual of the world that is around 25% of an indigenous peoples and nations. Mine is the Boricua. So that means that we carry this genetics, because that's how our ethnicity is. That doesn't mean that I have a native grandparent. That means that my ethnicity carries this ancestry and will carry it generation through generation, because that is the fingerprint of my ethnicity, and that's how we're gonna portray it. That's how it should be portrayed throughout the years, because we should protect our own ethnicity. However, now I'm gonna talk about why is there the 2% of the Melanesian or the Papuan that I didn't mention? Like, why? So in archaeogenetics, we know of a population that first reached the Americas, and this was at the time when there was a lot of ice, because there was a catastrophe, and maybe the sun was blocked, and a whole bunch of stuff were happening. And it's called the Younger Dryas, and the ice sheets were covering the oceans, and they were creating these passages through the continents that were really connecting these continents. These continents now it was easier to travel. If you didn't want to travel through the ice or the snow or whatever it was, then you could just sail through the coast of these ice sheets, and you would be most likely safe, and I mean somewhat safer than walking through the ice. But then again, it would be a faster way to travel, and that would explain how all these people eventually at first reached the Americas. And in archaeogenetics, it's called population X, and it's also maybe this name is also most likely from the haplotype which is found, and it is said that is mtDNA, M from the mtDNA, which is the mitochondria. This means that when the ancient North Eurasians came in with the Paleo-Siberians, this is the second immigration into the Americas. They took over all of the Americas, and all of these Melanesian people that were native to America were terminated, were destroyed at a level where we can see they were displaced totally, at a level where maybe around 2% of their DNA may be seen autosomally among maybe modern Puerto Ricans, for instance, right? But there may be other ethnicities, maybe in Peru, maybe in Colombia, maybe in Venezuela, maybe in the islands, maybe the Caribe factions that may also share this Papuan like ancestry. So look, let's make the calcs, show me the calcs, right? So let's do the calculations right here and right now. It's just gonna be an estimate, right? This is not gonna be official. But if I am around 24% indigenous of Puerto Rico, but let's say that this ancestry is also, I'm sorry, but there's also an ancestry that is Papuan. So, okay, let's talk about this first, but then I have to talk about how do I know for sure. But if we talk about this one first, is that we are going to have an estimate of the approximation of how much of the Papuan ancestry is particular to the Native Americans of Puerto Rico, for instance, the Taino or the Iquiñeri. So how much of this ancestry would have been proper to their genetic contents, to their DNA, like how much of this Papuan did they have with all the people coming in, which we mentioned. So how much of that Papuan ancestry was left then? So let's make the calcs. So let's say that at least maybe 2%, or let's say it's 4. Let's just say it's 4. Let's say that 4% of my ancestry is from the Papuans. So, and I'm a 25% indigenous Puerto Rican. So, it's around that because I have tests that have said 22. I have tests that have said 23. I have a test ancestry says 21 point something eventually, and it has a higher range of like 25 or more. But then I have another test that has my indigenous ancestry at around like 27. So that's why I say that I'm a castizo, which means a 25%, a quarter indigenous Caribbean individual of the modern day, which is Puerto Rico, is Borican, some of the people in the Caribbean with the highest indigenous ancestry overall. Because I've known that in Cuba there's people with high levels of indigenous ancestry, but we're still not talking about an overall. So the full nation of Puerto Rico shares in about 60% of the whole amount of the people. Well, about 65% or 61, give or take, share the mitochondria, which is totally different from the nuclear DNA. So let's make the calculation. So if my Papuan ancestry would be around 4%, then 4, 12, and then 16, right? 4. I'm sorry. I jumped one. I'm so sorry. 4, 8, 12, 16. So we have multiplied the number 4 by 4. So 4 by 4 equals to 216. And 16 will be around what the Native Americans of Puerto Rico would have shared in this Papuan-like ancestry, or something or anything around that margin. You have to understand it's still super high. The approximation for Native Americans with this genetic component called X, that is around 2% amongst Native Americans in general. We're not talking about modern populations. We're talking about Native Americans. So I have more Papuan ancestry than general Native Americans. And this comes from the Taino. Why? Because the ancient Native Americans did not conquer all of Native America equally. So some people are gonna be full ancient Native American with no Papuan ancestry. It's possible. It's possible that they were, and it's genetical also, that they were totally displaced, because in some places it may not be visible ancestry. So nonetheless, still, I can still explain how our Puerto Ricans, or the Boricua, or the indigenous people of Puerto Rico, how would they have 16% of this Papuan-like ancestry? It could be less, give or take. It's just an approximation. But now I'm going to tell you why, because it is a fact. It does come from the indigenous people of Puerto Rico. So I'm going to tell you how did I do that. I did that through a scientific analysis. So what did I do? I went through maybe thousands of genetic results. But these weren't your common generic DNA test. I searched them especially and specifically from GetMatch, because that's where I'm getting my Papuan like ancestry. So I did reach a conclusion upon investigating and researching and observing these onto these genetic tests, onto these genetic results that I was analyzing, and this was the result. So I'm a Puerto Rican. I have high levels of European ancestry, and I have like around 16, or it could be 14% of this sub-Saharan African. You already know my Native American result, which is I have results from 21, I have results 22, I have results that say 23, and it also has a range of like 25, but I also have a DNA test that says 27. So that being said, I'm really not that high level in African for being Puerto Rican, because a lot of Puerto Ricans have in your 19 ranges, 25 ranges. It could be even more common, but it's still a high level, having about 16 or 15. I think it should be 15 or something like that, total sub-Saharan African DNA. But I think I'm not sharing their mitochondria or their lineages at all. There might be some down the line, but I think that they were terminated. Like they stopped having children with this lineage, and eventually the Native American lineages were more frequent among my family, who Puerto Rico was haciendas and ranches, and farms and a whole bunch of stuff like that. And at this time, well, you had your emancipated slaves. I'm sorry, they weren't slaves anymore, but they were emancipated. They weren't emancipated, but all throughout this interaction, there was the Spanish, and then there were the laborer class that used to live around the acres of the landlords and all that sort of stuff. But there was also forestal regions where indigenous people used to roam. So that just added to help onto my ancestry, because some of that is coming from Sabana Grande, but I know that some of that is also maybe definitely coming, or most likely, from Maricao. So this just could be, it's just to add some onto what we're saying, because I did the analysis, right? And I analyzed so many nations that are deriving their DNA from sub-Saharan African peoples. So if I could find maybe 4% or a high level or more, maybe 7%, maybe 15% of this Papuan DNA, but it had to be like at a level of like 15% for it, in order to make sense for my get match DNA results being Puerto Rican. So is it coming from the Native Americans? So let's see right now. So what did I do? I did the analysis myself. I went through nations. I went through maybe Somalia, and I went through their get match results, all that I could find. It was a lot of work. I went to maybe Nigeria, and I did I searched it, and I did the comparison. And then I did the comparison with Caribbean nations. And it was also a lot of similar work. I did the comparisons with Dominicans. I did the comparisons with Jamaicans. And I did this analysis with maybe Cubans, but not necessarily that much, but specifically with Haitians as well. So you have to understand that I ran through a whole bunch of nations that I analyzed, and this was the conclusion when I searched the results for maybe nations like Haiti. Well, the Papuan ancestry was at around like 1%. And in some samples, Papuan like ancestry wasn't even visible. For instance, regions like the Bantu expansion and all these people in West Africa, like Cameroon, and like the tests say Cameroon, Congo, and Western Bantu people. So I did the analysis, and some of them don't have Papuan ancestry. Either don't have it, or their Papuan like ancestry is just too low. Like how can it? This is gonna be my honest question. So in order for me to reach that scientific conclusion, I was like, how can a sub-Saharan African who look more like the Papuans have a lower Papuan ancestry than myself? I look like, I don't know, but not like sub-Saharan African, right? So it had to be the Taino then. And it made sense, because if you look through the ancestry of people from Puerto Rico, you will see that their Papuan is more visible than any other of these nations. So are you not seeing the correlation and the connection? This connects with the genetic map that of an ancient immigrations of people that are coming in from maybe Oceania and then through the Pacific, and then these people went through Peru, through Colombia, Venezuela, and all that, right? Also, so, you can't count them out. You can't count them out. Suriname and Guyana Francesa, they most likely, for sure, also experienced the same Y chromosome immigrating from these regions onto the Lesser Isles and then onto the Greater Antilles, or la Antilla Mayor, but only reaching onto Puerto Rico. And this really makes a lot of sense, because I'm seeing it in my DNA, and there's already a genetic map that is narrating forensically the same event. So that being said, this is how I know that our negatives are Taino, the people of Puerto Rico, And this was just, that we're just saying things here and there. We're not necessarily doing a super big. It's not that difficult. It's not that hard. That to think that this investigation is actually simpler than it seems, and I could just reach onto that and then I could just reach this conclusion upon analyzing the genetic maps that are already done, the samples, the history, and my own DNA as a Puerto Rican who I'm still alive. And I'm a Boricua and we're still Boricua. So that's how I know that the indigenous people of Puerto Rico have high levels of ancestry that derive from the Papuans, from these Polynesian factions, for sure. That's how I know, because I did the genetic investigation. And now you know why also, how I know and why were these immigrations coming in. But that being said, if you can understand the discrepancy of Native Americans and how mixed they truly are, if you go to my Get Match, my Native American is broken down into maybe also like 14 ethnicities, and I'm not kidding. There's East Siberian, there's West Siberian, there's Central Siberian, there's Uralic ethnicities trickling in. There's like people from like the Bering Strait or from the north of Canada, from that region over there in Kamchatka. All these Siberian ethnicities, all of these Siberian ethnicities are not the same, are not one. Are different groups coming in. I also have Tibet, I have Southeast Asia, I have East Asia. My Native American is broken down, but it does acknowledge that there is like 12% Native American. So what does that mean? If I'm actually 27% Native American, and then Get Match is saying, oh, but you have about 12% of your Native American DNA is Native American. So what does that mean then? I can explain to you right now. Those are the ANA. The ANA are the first Native Americans that came into Native America. The ones who I told you that are not mixed with the newer, more future generations, but in the immigrations, but in the future, they will experience people coming in from Polynesia, from maybe even some Chinese, and maybe just some of them, but that's not necessarily totally a factor, but that's just food for thought. Just to extend about the possibilities. So for sure, the Siberians are coming in definitely with some Han ethnicity. Neo-Siberians are very similar also to the Chinese. So that's why I'm saying that. So there is no doubt that there's high levels of East Asian ancestry, peoples with high cheekbones and all that. So that's why maybe I still resemble ancient North Eurasians. So for all the mixes that I truly have, and to still look not like an ANA, but a genetic group from antiquity, archaic group, such as the ANE, who are known to be partially West Eurasian and also partially Paleo-Siberian. So if I still look like that, then I look like a Paleo-Siberian, because not all Paleo-Siberians are the same. One look more West Eurasian and West Asian, and the other have more East Asiatic phenotypes and appearances. So yeah, like that's pretty much the whole video. I don't think I left anything But now you know that Puerto Ricans still like me, and it's not the same among, you can have more indigenous Puerto Rican DNA than myself, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna have more Papuan ancestry myself, because maybe the corner of Puerto Rico that I come from had more Papuan ancestry than whatever corner you come from in Puerto Rico, if you can understand that in that way. Because it wasn't as globalized as you may think in the past. Like, there was a lot of people, there was a lot of ethnicities and multicultural and a melting pot, but it wasn't necessarily a melting pot where they were melting all equally. Like, for instance, let's take Puerto Rico and let's just give an example to just to say, just to understand it, just to give that example, right? So imagine, let's say, as an example, because I could really go about it differently with this one, with this example. But let's say in the west side of Puerto Rico, you had more ancestry from Mesoamerica and more ancestry from those newer Native Americans who are with the straighter hair and with the higher cheekbones and maybe with even lighter skin. But then in the east of Puerto Rico, as this example goes, which is just an example, then you have these Papuans and they have these afros, and maybe even some of them can have beards and all that sort of stuff. And then and then is that we are actually getting Neo-Siberians coming into Puerto Rico and into all of these nations. Actual Neo-Siberians. Northeast Asiatic that look like the Koreans and the I don't know, those East Asians from the Northeast. Are not necessarily darker. Some of them are. If they're from Siberia, they could be kind of darker, like the Native Americans. But a lot of them are pale, are very pale skinned, very light skinned. So, and they have one of the straightest hairs in the world, and that explains how then all of these really are melting in. Like, these are coming into Puerto Rico and to all of these nations in the Caribbean and in the North America. You got the Algonquian and the Nadene or the Nadene and the Ojibwe. These nations are definitely partially Neo-Siberian, but not like in my case where our indigenous people were most likely, I don't know, like 60% of their original. But the Ojibwe and all these Algonquian and, the Sioux and the Cree and the all of these indigenous people that I am mentioning that are from the Algonquian and Nadene family of languages, they have strong ancestry. It's like almost half or more of their ancestry from Neo-Siberians. So some of them are Neo-Siberians. Like, I'm not kidding. Some of the Native Americans are Neo-Siberians. What does that mean? It's just Neo-Siberians that got to there. So what does a Neo-Siberian mean? What is a Neo-Siberian? It's an immigrant. It's like saying an Italian. And I'm not joking. Neo-Siberians are not Native Americans. They do resemble them in a way. Even Chinese would eventually, or Japanese would eventually, or some of these Polynesians would eventually resemble indigenous people in a way. But if they're all lumped up in the same continents, they will all be like, oh yeah, that's a Native American. Oh yeah, that's a Native American. Oh yeah, that's a Native American. However, there is a difference. There is a discrepancy. We have the genetics even for their dimensions. So in Patagonia, in south of Patagonia, and el estrecho de los Magallanes, and those Indians from the south and all that from the south of America still share some of the cranial proportions and dimensions in their anatomy that still links them to these immigrations. So what I'm trying to say is that this is a genetic truth, and also it's also historical truth where, and linguistics, and in the historical and in the genetics, it all matches. So this is confirmed sciences, guys, boys and girls. These are genetic sciences, and it's just the truth. Melanesians came here, Polynesians went over there. It's like that. There was even a Chinese, what it was called, the Chinese uh, journey voyages through the world or something like that. That at one time in one of these ancient Chinese dynasties, they just decided to explore the whole world with their boats and all that stuff, and they even recorded long ago, like way before everybody. They recorded how they reached Native America and all that stuff, and they probably had a small exchange, is what I can say, maybe somewhere, but maybe the Chinese just left or something. But there's also the possibility that they could have maybe have some marriages, but that's just some of the possibilities, because most of the ancestry is coming in actually, yeah, from Siberia. So that being said, yeah, there's nothing else to say from that. So I hope you liked this video, and for sure I hope you can give me a like, hit that thumbs up. This I can talk, and subscribe, but I can talk about this like this, but without a video essay or nothing to read. I'm just talking about it, right? But it hasn't been easy. I burnt my, I studied so hard throughout the years. I don't stop studying. So all of the information and all of the facts is, it's pretty much literally coming in from the connections and from everything that I have learned. Oh well, I see something and I say, oh well, this is true, this is real. So that they're saying over here, it has a connection. So nothing is painted or written in the same way ever. But that being said, you can still analyze the same scriptural culture and scriptural cultures and their forms and when they narrate a story, they probably say so many things that are the same. For instance, when the world was destroyed, all the nations know about that and they speak about it, but they didn't share a connection because they were kilometers apart. So how did they know the same stories? And because they were looking at what they were talking about. They were narrating stories from things that they were witnessing in real life. Well, that's all that I have to say. That this wasn't easy. It's a super interesting investigation. The time that it has taken me to reach this point, it hasn't been easy. It's like a lot of reading and a lot of comparing and a lot of scientific evaluation. It hasn't been easy. Like, it's a logical route where I mixed the genetics with the archaeogenetics, and I even add physics, I even add biology, I even add chemistry, I even add geology. There is mathematics working with our sciences and our analysis right now. we are looking for clarification. We are looking for the truth and for the real understanding. So that's why we can just reach this conclusion that Papuan-like ancestry apparently is higher among Puerto Ricans. So I hope you subscribe and you like this video, and if you want to help me, then I'm gonna leave you my buy me a coffee link so you can buy me a coffee. That will help a lot, and thank you so much. I hope you guys are okay. Let's keep helping Puerto Rico, and let's keep just making everything better for everybody, and then that will eventually fall onto you, and everything will be better for you too, for sure, because this is a community and that's a reality. Somos boricua. Huepa.